Alright, so here's our wireless LAN controller. It's running 7.3 and it already has an access point registered. So I'm going to show you that. Go to wireless. We already have our access point. So for the wireless LAN controller, you would configure it as normal, but there are additional tweaks that you might or actually need to do to make sure the communication between wireless LAN controller and ISE goes smoothly. The first thing you want to do is to disable DHCP proxy. And the way you do that, you go Controller, Advanced DHCP, and again, just like how we did on the switch, we want to make sure ISE receive all the DHCP packets that's coming from the user. So by default, the wireless LAN controller accesses DHCP proxy, so we want to disable that. So any DHCP packets can basically hit the switch or it's the default gateway or interface VLAN and can be forwarded to ISE. Okay, next I'll configure the Snmp on the switch, on the controller rather. Okay, so we have version 2. We're just going to concentrate on Snmp version 2 since it's the most commonly used. It's by default enable. Now we're going to configure community. Just go new. We're going to use Cisco RO. And we only allow ISE 32.102 with the netmask /32 read only. I'm going to enable. Okay, you might want to remove the default ones. Next, we'll configure a trap just like we did on the switch. Computer name again, go to Cisco RO. Point that to ISE. Enable. Okay, so now that the Snmp is configured, we're now going to add radius servers to the controller. Then you go to Security, Radius, Authentication. You want to make sure the call station ID type is system MAC address. Then to add an authentication server, click New, give it ISE IP 16.32.102, share secret, Cisco, port number 1812, status enable. We'll leave the RFC 3576 enable. We want to use it for network user authentication, but we do not want to use it for management. So we'll click Apply. Then we add ISE to an accounting server. Same thing here. Leave everything at default. And then apply. Okay, now we can go ahead and create an SSID so we can show you some configuration adjustment under the SSID. So let's go and add an SSID called lm-internal. We will basically going to use this for our internal or employee so-called authentication in the Futures Lab. So let's call lm-internal, click Apply, and then we want to enable SSID radio policy. Let's leave it at all frequency. Let's tie it to management for now. We go to security. Let's see. Let's leave the securities by default for now. We'll come back and change that later. But for AAA server, we want to point to ISE for both for authentication and accounting. Okay, QoS will leave at default. For advanced, we want to do AAA override. That is very important, so make sure you have that box checked. Then for NAC state, we make it radius NAC. Let's go ahead and apply. Actually, we want to do DHCP profiling as well. So it said right here, as soon as you click that, it said enabling client profiling required DHCP required and disabling local auth. Okay, so let's see. We need to make sure that DHCP address assignment is a required. And let's try that one more time. Apply. Okay. Looks good. Let's go back and make sure that took effect. Yes. Alright, so that basically a little adjustment that you might need to make to your SSID. Now the last thing I want to show you on as far as the wireless LAN controller configuration is what they call a captive bypass. So if you own, for example, an iPhone and you're trying to connect to like a public Wi-Fi, you might have seen or experienced a little popped up. It's what it's called a pseudo web browser that iPhone has to detect any kind of web authentication the user has to go through before they can connect to internet. Sometimes what we've seen is that might interfere as far as when the controller tries to work with ISE or user tries to talk to the controller. It might not get redirected properly. So if you run into that kind of issues, it's recommended to disable or actually enable the captive bypass. But obviously the side effect of doing this is when the user connects to our, for example, guest SSID, they would not be prompted or redirected by the iPhone automatically, but instead they might need to launch their browser separately. So to enable captive bypass, you need to do that from the command line only. So now we're going to have to SSH to the controller. Okay, then we'll lock in. And the command to do that, go to config, network, web auth, captive bypass, and then enable. Okay. Once you enter set right here, web auth support for captive bypasses will be enabled. You must reset system for this setting to take effect. So the next thing you want to do is to save your config on the controller. Okay, successfully save, and then you can go ahead and reboot the controller. Reboot. Okay, so that should be all you need to do on the controller for now. Now the last thing we're going to do is to add the controller to ISE. Actually, there's a few more things that we need to do on ISE. One is to create a user. So back when we were configuring a switch, and when we configure the radius server, we tell it to use the ISE test user account to check in with ISE. So we need to make sure that there's a corresponding account created on that. So identity user. Let's go and add, and we call it ISE-tests with the password Cisco. And I just remember that that would not meet the password complexity, so let's see if we can do Cisco123 instead. Okay. So we go submit. Alright, and then if you go to the network devices, we already have a switch 1 added for our previous video, but one thing we did not do was configuring Snmp on the switch. So now that we have the Snmp configured, we need to inform ISE as far as what community it needs to use to perform a Snmp query on the switch. So we gave it Cisco RO, and we use a version 2 polling interval. You can go as low as the 600 second. So let's do that. Versioning policy service node, and they would say we're going to initiate that from ISE. Although we only have, since we're doing a standalone mode, we only have one server. But if you were to have multiple policy service nodes, then you need to assign a policy service node to perform a Snmp query for that particular device. So go save. All right. Now let's go back to network device groups real quick. We had created a device type switch in the previous video. Now that we are dealing with a controller, wireless controller as well. So let's add a wireless LAN controller. Let's call it WLC. That's a device type. Submit. Go back to network device. Add. Name, let's call it WLC1. IP address 172.16.32.104. Device type WLC. Authentication setting. Give the rated secret Cisco. Make sure it's correct, Cisco. And we also need to configure Snmp. Cisco RO. So update that to 600 and point it to your LM ISE1. Submit. Alright, so now that we have both Cisco switch and wireless LAN controller configured and added to ISE, here's the last thing I want to show you on this video is to how to run a configuration validator. So you go to Operations, Diagnostic Tools, Security Group Access Tools, or actually it's on General Tools, and it's under Evaluate Configuration Validator. Okay, so we're gonna try to validate our switch configuration and see what ISE comes back with. So the switch IP is, let's give it a loopback, 0.1, and let's say we want to check, well, we're not doing local WebAuth. Skip the profiler CTS. Let's just do 802.1x, and let's say we want to do a high security mode, which is closed mode. Okay, so now we're getting a little message from ISE that said user input required, click here. So let's do this. And it's asking us for a username and password that it can use to log into the switch and view the config. So we did not have SSH enable. So we're just going to telnet, although you definitely want to do SSH in your production environment. Enable password, although it's really also Cisco, we're just going to manually type it Cisco. Let's see what's under advanced drop down. Then if you have like a customized login prompt, then you probably need to tell ISE what's to look for so it knows how to or where to enter the username and password. Since we have that set, leave at default. So go ahead and submit. Now it's connecting to device, so let's see if we can catch this. On switch 1, we go who. Don't really see anything yet. Let's say waiting for interface name. So let's see. Maybe we didn't quite catch it in the while I was trying to log into the device. So user input required again. So click here. Now it's asking which interface you want to evaluate the config. So I believe we configure on the FAS1019. So go submit. Alright, looks like it's completed. Although I was kind of hoped that we can catch while ISE was locking into the switch. But anyhow, let's look at the result. Alright, so we see here is a couple red, so let's go through that one by one. So here's the output of running config, so ISE was able to telnet to the switch and then grab the running config. Then we have a AAA configuration. Since there's no red, so there's actually two versions of this. It looks like we have all the commands in the second version, so that's why it's not showing up as red. And then you can look at the one that has red, which means there's some missing commands, although it might not be mandatory, but it's recommended. So you can see right here, there's a column for mandatory. These guys are. And you can see right here, although we do have a command that's pretty much similar to this, we just have the additional username at the end. ISE doesn't really basically it was trying to do is the exact match and not the variant. Right? It doesn't really accept the variant of that. So take this as a grain of salt and just use that as a sanity check basically, and see if you have any command that you may need or you think you need missing. So for example, DHCP snooping, it may or may not be applicable, although it said mandatory. Again, it's just got to do with a profiling, I believe. So it looks like we've got the majority of the mandatory commands. So right here you can pick and choose if and decide whether or not you want to add those missing commands that ISE recommend or not. Okay, so now that we have both the switch and wireless LAN controller configured, we are now ready to proceed with the policy configuration, which we will look at in the next video. Okay, so that wraps up our 802.1x switch and wireless LAN controller recommended configuration. Thank you for watching LabMinutes.com. I'll see you guys in the next ISE video.